I was trained originally in the Shotokan style by a guy named Robert Fusaro. Fusaro had trained in Japan while he was in the military back in the 50s, late 50s. And so at that time, I think he met Funakoshi sensei, but trained predominantly with Nakayama sensei. Eventually, he became a direct student of Nishiyama sensei and part of Nishiyama's organization. Now, Nishiyama was in California and Fusaro sensei in Minneapolis. There's kind of a distance between those two. And so that meant that Fusaro sensei wasn't seeing Nishiyama sensei all the time. He would see him a couple times a year. He would go out and train, as I recall, for a week or two at a time and spend that time with Nishiyama, but then he would come back. So he wasn't like the guys in Nishiyama's dojo. They were there all the time. They were always with Nishiyama, and Fusaro, he was traveling. So here's what's interesting about that is that right now Fusaro sensei is an 8th or a 9th dan in the Japan Karate Association, making him, I think, the highest ranked non-Japanese in the entire organization. Fusaro maybe is Nishiyama's best student. Now, I've seen this many, many, many times. When you start looking about who's really the person who you've heard of, and maybe you've heard of their very famous teacher, but then who's their student who you've heard the most about, who seems to be the most effective at sharing the art, spreading the art, that rarely is a person who came directly from the teacher's dojo. So when we're talking about, for example, Remy Presas, I know 3 of Remy's most senior people. What he gave them the rank of Master of Tappy Tappy. One is Gabriel Roloff in Germany, and then Chuck Gauss and from Michigan, and then Ken Smith from Illinois. Now, right away, this tells you something. None of them came from Professor Presas' own school. They're not from his dojo or school or whatever he called it. They weren't there. So here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that the very best people don't necessarily come out of what you might call the Hombo dojo, the source school. They often are people who come from a distance. I think I kind of know why. And I can speak to that a little bit from my own experience, because there was a point when I was a student in a dojo, and I was in the dojo 10 to 20 hours a week training. But that's what my training was. I would go to the dojo, and what would happen? Sensei would say, watch your back foot, or relax your shoulders, or keep your elbows in. And so then he'd come back later, I'd keep your elbows in, and then maybe later on, keep your elbows in. That meant I don't have to remember to keep my elbows in because Sensei's going to remember it for me. And one of the things I noticed was that it was when my life got in the way of my going to the dojo that I think that's when I really started to train, because that's when it was on me. No longer could I let Sensei remind me to keep my elbows in. I had to remember to keep my elbows in. No longer could I count on him to tell me to adjust my foot positions if they were wrong. I had to do that myself. I had to be responsible for my own art. So when I met Sensei Dillman, I was already used to that process. That meant that me and also my colleagues who are the senior people in our Dillman organization, Dillman Karate International, guys like Matt Brown and Will Higginbotham and Steve Stewart and Bill Holman, Dusty Seal, the late Ed Lake. These people who are right now kind of the top in the Dillman organization, marked by the fact that they're traveling the world teaching, and they're being invited to go all kinds of places. They're really having an impact. These are the ones who, if you go like into Europe and you start talking about Sensei Dillman's students, these are the names that are known. We did not come from his dojo. We instead had to travel and train with him. So we'd come and train, and he'd show us something. I couldn't come back the next day and go, Sensei, what was that point again you showed me? I had to remember it. We all had to remember it. We had to get it right. We had to go home and practice it so that the next time we saw him, we would be prepared to learn something more. He expected us to go and train. He expected us to go and study. He expected us to work things out. He would expect us to come back and demonstrate what we were working on. Show me what you're working on. Show me the technique. Show me one of your techniques. Do something. Because he expected us to own our own art. So out of this, I guess I have a couple of suggestions for you. Train on your own. Be responsible for your own art. I'm not saying don't go to the dojo. I think it's essential to have a teacher who can kind of have that perspective on you and give you insight, but you got to train on your own. If you go to the dojo 3 times a week, then you should be doing some self-training on days you're not there and get your technique better. You do that, you're going to become a much better martial artist. You'll be a martial artist, and this leads to you being your own martial artist, because we're not martial mimics. We're martial artists. Our job is to develop our own interpretation based on the sound principles that we received. I'm Chris Thomas, and these are some reflections from the master class. Thanks for watching. Now go train.